Okay, here are some short reviews for February 11th. And, I guess I'll preface this with the fact that I don't think February is a very strong month. I don't think there's a ton of great records that I want to talk about. I'm not even sure that I'm going to be able to come up with 20 at the end of the month. I'm doing my best here. But that's a combination of not receiving promos for a lot of the albums I was anticipating, like Percolac and Dark Space and a couple of others. I just haven't heard those records yet. So it's kind of up in the air. uh, like I kind of have to wait till the 23rd to kind of make my final judgment on the month for a lot of those records. And I'm just not that impressed in general with a lot of what February has offered. So I'll be focusing on the things I really did like, and some of them are here on these short reviews. I think that Ariel, this is a long-standing project from Mark Cobb Soroka of, you probably know him best from Chornobog, or Crook or Drown. I think he's ended Drown at this point. But this was an ambient, atmospheric black metal band from back in the day, and it retains some of the post-metallic, wishy-washy guitar tropes, which I don't like very much. Otherwise, it creates a pretty interesting sound with its ambiance, its use of synths and um, mutilated sound, basically, to create this scenery in each piece on this record. It's a very dramatic record that has a lot of, I think it's more characterizing than a lot of their past work. There's a lot of sort of martial feeling pieces on here. There's some marches, and there's some just wind effects blowing around. There's a lot going on there for Elinary and Bellmaster. And um, again, it's not that memorable. I don't know how long it'll be in terms of its lasting value, but I got a kick out of spending time with it. I think I had sort of a connection with where he was going with it, or they were going with it, but I don't know that. I don't think it has any sticking power in my mind overall. Although I've enjoyed some of or their past releases with this group. Um, this was maybe just the one to characterize the band best thus far, and the whole idea of it. But I think they could do without a lot of the actual black metal interest, because it's a little bit soft and wishy-washy compared to the sort of horror atmosphere that this felt otherwise. So it's not bad. So, if you'll recall, I really enjoyed Dismal Spells from the Dragon Realm, a very long album from Druidan Forest back in 2019. And this follow up to it is a self contained, more reasonable sitting here with shorter songs. And I think it's almost close to half the length of the first one, which was, I think, over an hour and 10 minutes or so. So we have a 45-minute dungeon synth record here from a atmospheric black metal artist, and you know the other bands that he's known for, Vagrav and several others. So the big thing with this is that it uses this sort of medieval dungeon synth approach to these what are essentially it's like a soundtrack, basically, of a 45-minute soundtrack that pushes you through these scenes. And for me, it's just an effective piece of background music that can also function in the foreground, and that's kind of as much as I could ever ask for from a dungeon synth record. I think that there's very strong selections made for the voicing of each song, and to retain that high fantasy feeling of it. And not to mention, the songs get in and they get out in a way that's effective enough. And when I leave this on repeat while I'm reading a book or playing maybe a less engaging video game, that's my main use for a record like this. So I might have listened to this like 30 times just because that's the way that I approach a dungeon. I don't sit there and stare at the wall while I listen to dungeon synth. So I find that most of his work is effective in this sense. Um, and this is a good example of that gets to its point more often. It loops more quickly and easily, and just served as a good soundtrack to whatever nerd ass thing that I was doing. So I appreciated it. It's a strong record, and I would recommend it. say that I'm pretty much hot and cold on this latest album from The Obsessed, because in a lot of ways it's not really The Obsessed. It's more like um, Wino plus some of the ideas that Spirit Caravan would have brought. There's also some ideas that The Obsessed would have brought, and it's also whatever's just on his mind at the time. It's kind of just his band under this name, and I don't think it's a bad thing. It's always kind of been that way, but I don't find this record nearly as strong as Sacred was back in 2017. In terms of some of the lyrics were a little bit strangely, well, they're just interesting to characterize. You know, the fellow just the confrontation of "it's not okay" is, it's an important thing to say. But it's just kind of, I don't know what to think about that song. Um, while I appreciate the same kind of candor on Stone to the Bomb Age, so there's um, the lyrics are important on a record like this for me, and I feel like I just didn't get what he was on about a lot of the time. So I probably need to go back and read up on what he said about these songs. But um, it sort of took me out of what is a pretty decent stoner doom metal record, essentially. And I would say one that's just heavy rock in general. There's some doom on here too. Nothing too elaborate or out of the ordinary. It doesn't feel like it stands out in any a self-assured way, but it's just an all right record. Above average, of course, but it just feels like the group could do this in their sleep. It doesn't feel like they really pushed more than the standard set already into this record, and it doesn't feel like it um, really makes good on the promise that they came back with on Sacred. It just kind of puts out another record, and I wouldn't say I was disappointed in it. I was expecting this standard, and it meets it, but it's also not anything to flip out about or go wild over.
The boots on the soil, helping unelected despots steal your water and oil.
So I think my main criticism of Sundrifter's latest album, An Earlier Time, is that they take this sort of grunge era desert rock feeling, and they kind of go a little bit alt rock with it. They have a lot of fun with it along the way. There's a lot of feeling put into these songs, but they never find a peak. They're sort of on a tangent. They're on a tear throughout, and a lot of these songs are voiced and create a similar mood and feeling. And I think it's a very effective one, but they never find that next level beyond where they hit. And so it's not a bad record at all. It's actually a pretty strong record. But it really stays in its lane, and it sits there, and it gets everything off its chest that it needs to, and it keeps it simple. They change things up here along the way in terms of the guitar sounds and some of the melodies the vocalist leads with. There is a little bit of a kind of a Soundgarden-esque swagger to their delivery and their intent. Not quite that big and that direct, but yeah, I could see why this would be good listening for the average listener. But again, I feel like that it just needed its dramatic peak. It needed a big song to really hit, to stick in mind overall. But it's good to see them back, and I think it's a good follow up to the previous record. Cosmos Brenner is the latest full-length album from Oslo, Norway-based duo Golden Core. Their sound is kind of a mixture of progressive sludge metal, something a little bit along the lines of High on Fire in some respect, but also there are influences from everything from black metal to progressive rock and prog metal. So the way they do this is not an ultra modern, glossed over sort of thing. There's sort of a darker edge to it. There's an organic feeling to a lot of the way they've arrived on these ideas, and you can tell these are young folks who are they're connected to more than just what's going on now. It doesn't feel trite, I guess. A lot of younger artists find trite places where that inspire them, and I feel like these people are running a bit more deep, and that comes across by way of the themes and the way they present them as well. There's a surreal, involved sense of musicianship in this record, and it creates something that is memorable while also being dramatic and outsized. It's the kind of band you could see opening for like Enslaved or something like that locally, or coming up with something that's maybe a little bit less convoluted in its or ambitious in the future, that is maybe easier to read and maybe quicker to the point, because I think their longer, more dramatic songs provide strong bookending for this record, and the middle point and the middle songs are sort of obstructed by um, intermissions and interruptions that are maybe cinematic in their intent, but sort of get in the way of the just pure efficiency of the record and pushing through its sort of the brunt of it. So if they could find an easier flow through these ideas that doesn't quite take its time so much, I think they'd be onto something that is pretty strong. But this is a good place. I think this is the high point for the band so far, Golden Core, and I think it's worth checking out if you're interested in something that's got a little bit of sludge and progressive metal in it, but it's also different. It's got some extreme metal in there too, that it doesn't make it feel so glossy, or it's not the usual thing. I appreciated that. And finally, we have Haystack's Doomsday Goes Away. I think this is their fourth or fifth record. These guys were around in the 90s after a member of Entombed became more interested in noise rock and garage rock, and split off into this band and put out some pretty cool records at the time. I think that this record, well, this is one of the bands that kind of got me into noise rock too. So it's kind of interesting to hear them have a similar sort of take on what I like about noise rock on this kind of stripped down and back to basic feeling record. And I like that we get the full sense of Haystack is a well. There's a lot of personality to it on this record, and the more they strip it back, the more that comes across. I think that there's been a lot of there's always been a lot of kind of heavy rock interruptions to their sound. It's never been cold and cold cut and severe like a lot of United States noise rock was from a certain era of the late 80s and early 90s. But they take influence from that on this record, and in a way, there's kind of this kind of Rollins band kind of push to some of these songs. There's a little bit of their own tendencies in there too, and I feel like this was an improvement over the last record. I liked the last record. That it was kind of their comeback record in some ways, however you state that. But um, this is one that I kept it on repeat. I really enjoyed it. I thought it had a lot to say, and it said it in an interesting way. I love the bass guitar tone, especially. I like that the production values they're almost, they're not crystal clear, but it feels present. There's like a real presence to this record that I appreciated, and I like in this type of kind of noise rock and that feeling. So, big fan of this record. I'm still listening to it, still enjoying it, and had nothing bad to say about it, really. There's a couple of songs that were like, I don't know about that one, but I think it was just one. So check it out. See if that's your thing, if you like noise rock and post hardcore and that sort of thing.